Here she is. I'm glad. I'm fine. Thank you, dear.
A little late, but I'm here.
Good morning, Lori.
Who do I step in from? Can I step in?
I am fine. Thank you, dear.
All right, yeah. Thank you.
Okay, we are ready to begin. Look at your activity and prayer page in the bulletin. The usual things are going on this week with story time and Wednesday night, Friday activities. East Liverpool was having a gospel meeting this weekend, and today is the last day. Information about it is on the back bulletin board. Of course, we are having our usual fellowship dinner today, except today we're going to have it outside. The last hour by hour radar I looked at was not going to be any precipitation until I think the middle of the afternoon. It was the percentage was supposed to start going out. So we should be able to get our dinner out of the way outside. I think that's all I need to say there. Now concerning our prayer list, Susan is with us this morning, but she is still not feeling well. We both went in on Friday and got a major going over. So hopefully we're on the road to recovery. See how that goes. Lori is with us, and Lori received a bad report from her doctor that she has cancer, and so she's got more tests to go through. And
I'll be having a hysterectomy, but I have to go for the consult, not this Tuesday, but next Tuesday.
okay,
And they won't know if it's spread or if it's all contained until they get it.
right. Okay, so we won't learn dates till you get all that out of the way. Okay, so keep Lori in your prayers. Pam is also going to have some surgery. Please keep her in your prayers. Betsy, I didn't see anything on Facebook. Betsy usually posts stuff on Facebook about her condition, but I didn't see any yesterday and this morning. But I know she was having a hard time with things. All right. We have others. Carl's sister, Cheryl Bonzo, receiving hospice care and not doing well. So remember her. And then somebody that's not in the bulletin yet, but her name is Jean Frederick. She's been in our bulletin prayer list before. That's Jane's sister. And she is, what is her specific ailment? Okay. Okay, so if you didn't hear Jane, bones in her sister's back are deteriorating. Okay. And I think that's all the new information I have. Anybody else have any information about anybody on our prayer list, including you. Okay. I might as well tell you I had an MRI yesterday morning on my brain, of all things. So I suddenly clam up, can't speak anymore, you'll know that I'm having another stroke. But we are not anticipating anything like that. Okay, so we are continuing our study of the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew chapter 7. Meaningful and useful Bible studies that Jesus is presenting to us. And this subject today is no different. And so with that in mind, as he is preparing. By the way, there are sections of Luke, mainly Luke chapter 6, that talk about the same subject matter, or some of the same subjects. And so sometimes they call what is in Luke the Sermon on the Plain, because it actually mentions it's on a plain. And scholars are forever trying to link the two and so forth. But I just accept them as they are. There is, again, I've talked about this before, just like any preacher, is it a surprise for any preacher, including Jesus, and especially in a time when there's not much in the way of written word, and so what are the chances that these people here, have heard what Jesus is saying if he preached it a couple of weeks ago, let's say over in Bethany or whatever, and of course the chances are slim to none. And so to see so much of the information in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John repeated, there's just a good sense of that, a good reason for that. All right, and so that brings us to our situation here. We're in chapter 7, which is, chapter 7 is really noted more for the subjects of judgment than anything else. But we have these verses here. The way I remember this is these verses here in 7 through 12, that God is going to give them what they seek or ask for and so forth. I just remember them as just a kind of a separate or parenthetical subject that kind of gets away from the other supposed main subjects of judgment. But of course, they're very well worth our time. So let's begin. There's a outline for this in the bulletin on page 1, 2, 3, 4. And so we'll just start off by reading verses 7 through 11. Matthew chapter 7, 7 through 11. As Jesus is going to talk about seeking and asking and finding, and what that all depends on, the Sermon on the Mountaintop. And so we're looking at this. So let's read verse 7. Jesus says, "Ask and it will be given to you, seek and you will find, knock and it will be opened to you, for everyone who asks receives, and he who seeks finds, and to him who knocketh it will be open. Or what man is there among you who, if his son asks for bread, will give him a stone? Or if he asks for a fish, will give him a serpent? If you then, being evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father who is in heaven give good things to those who ask him?" Okay, so we start off with a bang. And by the way, who is the giver here? Who is the giver? We're asking of whom? All right, asking God. about this, and as Jesus affirms here that God does answer prayer. And this is, if you look down through the questions I have several related passages. Is a very common from the book, the beginning of the book, beginning of the Bible to the end of the Bible, a common subject that God has, this way of communicating to us, and we kind of think, we can't see God, we can't hear God, and so, what's the proof of all of this? And even when it comes to prayer, well, how do I really know that God is listening or not? And so there is there's, I won't say a leap of faith, but there is faith involved in this subject matter. And so what is Jesus doing then? What does his modus operandi seem to be? Just okay. Right. And that's going to be brought out here. If you look at the questions, question number 2 draws out this comparison that Jesus makes. Question number 2, what point does Jesus make in comparing Jehovah to a parent, since parents are called evil by Jesus in this little passage? What's the intent of his words? Right. If poor, weak, maybe not so wise parents do these kinds of good things, this is in verse 11, to their children, how much more will God do for, and how does he refer to us? How much more will your Father who is in heaven give good things to those who ask him? And so we have this brought out that, God is so much higher than any normal parent, and yet normal parents do this stuff. So we can count on God. Now, what's the problem in our minds when it comes to prayer? Be honest.
Well, if we ask for something, then someone else won't get it.
Okay.
Instead of helping us means someone else won't get the help they need.
So your goal in praying is to exhaust God's supply of blessings.
Don't ask for
Right. And we could, it's not in the notes in the bulletin, but a good example of that would be James, end of James chapter 3 and the beginning of James chapter 4. It's, some, even Christians, sometimes we have the wrong attitude about prayer. And, we're thinking, we get selfish. It's all about me. And as James points out, that is the wrong way to go. So, when we think about this, and this verse here from 1 John chapter 5, verses 14 and 15, what's the thing that leaps off the page about these two verses is this condition that is put on God answering prayer. And what is that condition? 1 John chapter 5, verse 14. What's the condition? Okay. And that kind of, for a selfish person, which I can be sometimes, that kind of lets the air out of the balloon. You know, I thought you were promising me you'd give me whatever I wanted, but then we have this little phrase here, according to his will. Well, why bother to pray would be the conclusion that a selfish Christian might come to. Why bother to pray if God is just going to give me the things that I want that are according to his will? And so your response would be what? Okay. We have to, and that's brought out in James chapter 4. We don't receive because we don't ask is one of the reasons. But, okay. Okay, something extremely, especially if we throw the word spiritually, helpful into it. And certainly we don't have necessarily a corner on the market of understanding all the things in life that can be spiritually helpful for us. And so this is where, the wisdom of God would kick in. James chapter 1. If any of you that lacks wisdom, what are you supposed to do? And if you lacks wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives to all liberally. Yeah. And so, again, so we don't understand everything, and so here we are going through life, and this is why the phrase, thy will be done, is found throughout the scriptures, because God is the one and only supreme who can fill that role to give us exactly what we need when we need it, and even when we don't understand it. But this is the key to this whole thing. So this is important for us. If you have your Bible, you can turn to Matthew chapter 5. We began the Beatitudes. We began this study with the Beatitudes. And so let's look at the Beatitudes briefly. And I am asking the question number 4 on your outline. Which of the Beatitudes is like this promise about asking for stuff in Matthew 7? So the Beatitudes, let's just read through them quickly. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for they shall be filled. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Which one of those Beatitudes sounds closest to what Jesus is talking about here in Matthew chapter 7? Seeking and searching, finding. And I will admit, you have to stretch this a little bit. Okay. I will give you my answer. My answer would be verse 6 of Matthew 5. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be filled. And so, if I plug myself into that, I'm hungering and thirsting for righteousness, whether it's, wanting to learn more, whether it's wanting to do more, whatever the case may be, this would be, go right alongside here with this promise. Jesus saying, ask and it will be given to you, seek and you'll find, knock and it will be open to you. And so, it's important that we do have, we start out with the right desires. Again, we all know what it's like. I would say we all know what it's like to want something on our physical earth that is, just purely physical. Could be money, cars, houses, some other kind of physical pleasure. We understand what that this is the world that we live in. But, to really start getting into the way that Jesus and God thinks about this, we have to, change our viewpoint. Question number 5, what did Jesus ask for in John 11, 41 and 42? Anybody know what's happening in John 11? John 11 is the death of Lazarus. So Jesus is on the scene there. And this is the event, John 11:41. They took away the stone from the place where the dead man was laying, and Jesus lifted up his eyes and said, Father, I thank you that you have heard me, and I know that you always hear me, but because of the people who are standing by, I said this, that they may believe that you sent me. And so it wasn't just a matter, and this, I think we miss a lot about this, why Jesus does things. It's not just about helping people. We'd say, well, obviously Jesus wants to help Lazarus out. He's dead. But when we read these other comments, we see that there's more to this. Jesus is concerned about, well, if I do raise him back from the dead, will this have an effect on the people who are standing around here? And the answer is yes. And so, when Jesus gets to this point and he wants to know, he's thankful for what God is doing and about to do. But again, the motives are completely different. It's not about Lazarus at this point. It's about convincing people to believe in Jesus. Anybody want to comment on that? Okay. Next, we look at what's going on here. And we all know the story of Job. We all know, what happened to Job. He lost everything. And maybe some of us don't realize that the rest of the book of Job, end of chapter 2 to about chapter 38, is this discussion between Job and his 3 friends. And let's see if I can. They're mentioned at the end of Job chapter 3. Eliphaz, the Temanite, Bildad, the Shuhite, and Zophar, the Naamathite, and them and their discussion with one another, and of course their discussion with God. And so they go through this. They have this discussion, and let's just answer the question. When we get to the end of the book, the final say, Job 42, the conclusion, and we read verses 7 through 9. Job 42, 7 through 9. And so it was, after the Lord had spoken these words to Job, that the Lord said to Eliphaz the Temanite, my wrath is aroused against you and your two friends, for you have not spoken of me what is right, as my servant Job has. Let's tackle that first. So what did they say that was wrong, these friends of Job? Right. Yeah, they were just constantly, as the old saying goes, with friends like that, what do you need enemies for? And that's pretty much how it was. So they were blaming Job at every turn. This is all your fault. You have sinned, and that's why, God is punishing you for that. And so God is letting Job know and wanting the message to go to these guys that they have not spoken of God correctly. So let's read verses 8 and 9, Job 42. Now therefore, and notice what God is doing and saying about prayer. What's it have to do with prayer? Now therefore, take you for yourselves 7 bulls and 7 rams, go to my servant Job, and offer for yourselves a burnt offering, and my servant Job shall pray for you, for I will accept him, lest I deal with you according to your folly, because you have not spoken of me what is right, as my servant Job has. So Eliphaz the Temanite, and Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamathite went and did as the Lord commanded them, for the Lord had accepted Job. So what do we learn about prayer here? What do we learn about prayer?
Seems to be that God hears those that are right within some degree.
Right. Your relationship with God is going to have an influence on the effectiveness of your prayers. We see this several times in the Bible, Old Testament and New Testament. We've got Isaiah chapter 1. The Israelites there are told, their prayers are basically worthless because of the way they've been living their lives. Another one pops into my head from 1 Peter chapter 3. What's at the beginning of 1 Peter chapter 3? Verses that I read every night. How your wife should behave. 1 Peter chapter 3, beginning at verse 1, he's giving these instructions. Wives, likewise, be submissive to your own husbands, that even if some do not obey the word, they without a word may be won by the conduct, the example of their wives. And he goes on and talks about that for the next 5 verses. And then he has one verse for the husbands, 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 7. And then he sums it all up, and let's just read verse 7. Husbands likewise dwell with them, with their wives, with understanding, giving honor to the wife as to the weaker vessel, and as being heirs together of the grace of God. And then he has this one little, I call it a parenthetical, addition, that your prayers may not be hindered. And so, my prayers, evidently, they can be hindered if my wife and I are not behaving properly. Just a little addendum, and something that we should be, aware of. And so, when it comes to whether God is going to hear us or not, it's not just a matter of us. It's not an automatic thing. God is just not going to hear me, if I am not behaving myself properly. And so, the better that we try to do this and get a handle on this, the more we have the opportunity for God to hear us. Now, with that in mind, and we can go to James chapter 5, verse 16, where it's talking about another Old Testament character, Elijah. But it tells us in James 5:17, Elijah was a man with a nature like ours, and he prayed earnestly that it would not rain, and it did not rain on the land for 3 years and 6 months. And he prayed again, and the heaven gave rain, and the earth produced its fruit. But James is writing about this, for the same purpose. Elijah, who wasn't prayed earnestly, and showing his example. Well, here's the godly man Elijah. He prayed, God listened, it didn't rain. And so again, the lesson is there for us. So, with that in mind, what do we learn? What are we learning so far about prayer? What are we learning about prayer?
It's a two-way street to some degree.
Okay, it's a two-way street.
Your attitude has a lot to do with how much your prayers. You
You're-
can't have a disingenuous attitude or still be doing something you shouldn't expect good results.
And this should be, coming to us automatically, because we're dealing with a subject here that is not, how shall I say, it's not black and white. This is something that, again, is completely dependent on faith, and so we shouldn't be surprised to find God saying, I'm going to react to you and your prayers based on how you are, acting towards me. And so, why these things are very important for us. So, again, we have all these examples. We, just a ton of stuff in the Bible about this. And then we have this verse from 1 John chapter 3 and verse 22. Whatever we ask, we receive from him, because, again, more conditions. What are the conditions here from 1 John 3:22? We receive what we ask because what?
Keep his commandments.
Right, because we are trying to keep the Lord's commandments. We're trying to do what is pleasing, and it's actually pretty important if anybody is studying about prayer, that they kind of get this hub of what prayer is all about. The hub of prayer is our relationship with God. It's not a case of, I realize that, the specifics of this are mentioned just like here in Matthew chapter 7. But the hub of prayer is, it is my relationship with God and your relationship with God. And the benefits from prayer spring from that. So, and we had time, we could go and look at James chapter 4, where they have completely missed the boat on prayer. We're looking at prayer as being, something totally selfish, and this is not how it's done. Okay, any further comments before we look at verse 12? Verse 12 is, there is a connection, a subtle connection with the asking and seeking here, but verse 12 usually is handled individually, and it is what we call the golden rule. The New King James reads, "Therefore, whatever you want men to do to you, do also to them, for this is the law and the prophets." So verse 12 is a very, very basic principle when it comes to God and how He's, judging things. And again, looking at, what we want. Well, here's what I want, God. And God is telling me, well, let's take a second look here. And, let's make sure that you got this big principle down. Whatever you want men to do to you, do also to them. And so, with that in mind, we say, okay, piece of cake. We've taught this to our children, since they could understand what the words meant. Have we done a good job of putting this verse into practice? What do you think? Christians. I'm talking about Christians in general. Have we done a good job with this? Don't make me put my glasses on. Right.
Like most things, sometimes we do, sometimes not so much.
Right. And to me, the key word, it's not mentioned in this verse, but the key word is unselfishness. I'm not looking to, get some kind of edge on other people. I'm not looking for God to, bless me to the, to the point where, go ahead, God, and hurt everybody else as long as I get what I want. That is not the attitude that Jesus is wanting us to have. And so we're trying to, apply this to our lives. Interesting thing here, this number 10 on your outline, is what is called the silver rule, which comes from Oriental teachings. I don't know if it's from Confucius or whoever, but the silver rule sounds a lot like it, and it says if you don't want someone to do it to you, don't do it to them. So what's the difference between the silver rule and the golden rule? Thank you for mentioning that phrase, as I was trying to think of what that was. The golden rule is proactive. Okay, here's what I want, and here's how I am behaving, and so I'm treating other people this way, and hoping that I will get the same treatment in return. The silver rule emphasizes the negative. Well, I'm not going to do this, I'm not going to do that, or whatever, and so, just, leave me alone, God, or whatever. That's how that principle works. Now, what do you think are the hardest areas for us to apply the golden rule to? What's the hardest ideas? I will tell you my opinion on the hardest attitudes to overcome. A lot of it's taught in Romans chapter 12, the end of the chapter. But the attitudes about revenge, especially for men, I'm going to get you, turkey, or whatever. That seems to be, something that is said, especially by men, to show that they're really tough. I'm rough and tough. You hurt me, so I'm going to hurt you 10 times worse. And that's kind of built in. If you have grown up with 3 brothers like I have, it is a part of daily life. Doing something that your older brother might come in and pound you for. That was just a way of life. But then you have to learn, since since I was not the youngest brother, I had a younger brother that I could pound. And so if I pounded my younger brother, then my next oldest brother, usually Bob, would pound me. And so there's this constant, give and flow of love shared in the family. But the key here again is to make sure that we just have our right attitudes in the right place. I care about people. I do want to be treated well, and the best way for that to happen is for me to treat others well. By the way, what do you have to do that? You have to have something to be able to treat others well. You have to have faith. You have to trust God God is doing whatever I need, so things in my life will work out. Okay, and if I don't trust God, I'm always thinking, well, I've got to make my own way through life. I'm going through a hard time here. It's up to me to dig myself out of it. Again, we're going to have a hard time treating people well because we're thinking, oh, we have to have an angle about this. So that's what is necessary. The last thing that we want to look at relative to this is the golden rule. And what does the golden rule say? It's number 11 on your outline. I shouldn't have said golden. The first and second greatest commandments. First one is, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and one more thing mentioned in Luke, strength. Okay, so that's the greatest commandment. And the second greatest commandment is to love your neighbor as yourself. Now, if you look at question 11, what do these instructions about getting what you want have to do with the first and second greatest commandments and the law and the prophets? Getting what I want. Well, it's much like a lot of these other verses have to do with here. It is all about our relationship with God. It has nothing to do with, everything that everybody else in the world thinks is hugely important. Nothing, all of that is just a waste of time, talent, money, belongings, all that stuff is just a waste. And so when I can get myself to, I'm really going to put God first here. What does God want me to do with my life? And and then of course the second greatest commandment: how am I treating other people? Am I treating other people the way that God wants me to? Well, when I get those two commandments down, I'm doing pretty well here. And this is when my relationship with God really kicks in and starts to improve. Just you're getting it all and understanding it. Okay, any final comments about?
Jeff,
Yeah.
I really like the last thought you just shared, and I've been thinking about the relationship between the verses we were looking at earlier, where basically, to some degree, it could read, if you're on your good behavior, you'll get rewarded by God. And I think there may be some element to that essentially we need to be living how God wants us to live if we expect blessings from God. But obviously, it's also not binary. It's not if we do good, we'll get a treat kind of thing. And so I was thinking about that in terms of like my relationship with kids, and there's some element of that too. You know, if they're well behaved, if they're doing the things that we ask them to do, we may be more likely to reward their requests. But also, the more that they understand our will for them, the more they understand what we're asking them to do, why we're asking them to do the things we want them to do or not do the things we don't want them to do, the more likely they are to understand our responses to any of their requests, good or bad. Today, Brooks really wants me to work on digging up a stump with him after church for some reason, and I'm not going to have time to do that. And it's not because he's been bad, it's because I just don't have time to do it. But if Brooks was closer to knowing me, knowing the reason why, because I have something better for him, we're prepping for a trip later that's going to be way better than digging up a stump this afternoon. So if Brooks understood the will of the Father, he would know and have more peace with the answers. So I just think there's so many things at play here. Thinking about our relationship with God the Father, our responsibilities to act in according to his will, ask for things in accordance to his will. I think part of that is so that we get the things that we want and need, but also so that we ultimately are moving closer to God and growing with him. So
Yeah. And, what's the old television show? Marcus Welby, that actor. There you go. Here we go. And we're going to make a plaque to put over Jacob's door. Father knows best. The interesting thing to me, but with all this, especially when you consider children, is, when do children understand obeying anything about the relationship with God? At what point? That's very hard. It's not like a point you can say, well, when they turned 8, they got, no. And for some, they never understand it. So, there's just a lot of interesting things there. Okay. Thank you.